It's absolutely fascinating what Trudeau has done in the House of Commons. Now, what's been going on this week, if you haven't been watching, is that Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has been insisting that the government axe the carbon tax and get to balancing the budget, or it's going to filibuster the Liberals' budget bill. And it began to do that last night, Wednesday night this week. It began the filibuster with opposition leader Pierre Poilievre leading the charge. But this is a great exchange Wednesday in the House of Commons, and I want you to watch this.
Mr. Speaker, we don't need another drama performance, because at the end of the day, when theatrics collides with mathematics, the math always wins. And after 8 years of this Prime Minister, the Canadians have a stock of combined debt that is bigger than our entire GDP. In fact, we are the most indebted families of any country in the G7. The IMF says that Canada is the #1 at-risk country for mass mortgage defaults. Will he reverse his inflationary and high interest rate policies before people go broke?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I've answered this question a few times, but the Leader of the Opposition continues to ask it because he refuses to go outside and see what is actually happening in Canada. Forest fires are raging. It's the worst year on record for forest fires already, but the fact is they are going to get worse in the coming years because climate change is real. And yet the Conservative Party continues to stand against the climate action that we've been taking, stand against the investments that we're making to support families, to support first responders. They continue to stand against help for Canadians who are losing their homes, losing their families, losing their livelihood.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Has he really sunk into the low of exploiting these fires for political gain to distract from his inflationary and high interest rate policies? Is that what it's come to? That he's so ashamed of his economic policy and record?
I'm going to have to interrupt this because I'm getting noise from both sides. I know you can handle it. You do that well. But what I need to have is I want to hear what's being said, and I'm sure both sides want to hear what's being said. I'm going to ask him to start from the top, please.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister has just lowered himself to the worst steps to try and distract from his disastrous economic record. He's now using the forest fires to change the channel. This is even lower than I would have expected from him. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are going to sit down tonight to discuss how they're going to move into a small apartment because they're going to have to give up their homes after his inflationary policies have driven up interest rates on Canadian mortgage holders who have record debt. Will the Prime Minister keep the promise he made 6 months ago to balance the budget and bring down inflation and interest rates before folks go broke?
Yeah, interesting, because there's a lot of things going on here. And first of all, I want to address this forest fire issue. We put a poll out this week on Krayden's Right. Only one person responded to say that climate change is the reason for these forest fires that are creating a catastrophe across Canada, from the west to the Maritimes. This is a huge problem, but a lot of people are identifying arson and bad forestry management as the primary reason. And there is a lot of evidence in the media right now that people are deliberately setting fires and causing this. Trudeau has absolutely no firm or final evidence that there's any causal relationship between forest fires and climate change. Nobody's denying climate change. We're denying that there's a direct causal relationship, and that every time there's a forest fire or an increase in forest fires is necessarily linked to climate change. But Trudeau has the nerve to suggest if you don't support his climate change program, which adds up to really one thing, the carbon tax, that you are responsible for the forest fires. he has the gall to suggest the Conservatives, for not backing his climate change policies, read carbon tax, that they are responsible. Now, this is outlandish. This is outrageous. When the latest carbon tax goes through, Canadians will be spending 61 cents a liter every time they fill up, just in carbon tax plus GST. Now, I remember, and I'm not talking about the 1980s here, when we were able to buy a liter of gas for about 65 cents a liter. It wasn't that long ago when the price dropped that low. But now we're going to be paying 61 cents in carbon tax and GST alone. Now, that's a heck of a lot of expense. And what Poilievre is trying to say here is that Trudeau wants to change the channel because he doesn't want to acknowledge inflationary spending. He keeps talking about targeted non-inflationary spending, which is a crock. Trudeau has never demonstrated anything like non-inflationary targeted spending. It has been widespread spending. During the pandemic, during COVID-19, he spent even more than his finance minister, Bill Morneau, thought was advisable. And a lot of that money didn't even go towards helping people affected or impacted by the pandemic. So what does this all add up to? Trudeau is lying about how he's spending, about how his spending is affecting inflation, and how the inflation then affects interest rates. And those interest rates went up again this week by another 25 basis points. Every time they go up, people are spending hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars more on mortgage payments by month, by year. Now, this is an issue that affects a lot of Canadians. And Trudeau says, don't worry about your house. We've got a grocery rebate for you in the mail. Well, I tell you, if you lose your house and you can't even afford to live in an apartment, the rent of which is more than most people are paying for their mortgage, I don't think the grocery rebate's going to help very much when you're eating on the street. But that's exactly what Trudeau is doing. He's trying to change the channel. He wants to talk about climate change and nothing but climate change, and to blame the forest fires not only on climate change but on the Conservative Party, because he doesn't want to talk about the fiscal reality that he has created, which is catastrophic for people, and it's getting worse. So I think Poilievre has a good point here. The carbon tax needs to be axed and it has to be stopped. It should be repealed, but it's certainly, we do not need to build upon the carbon tax even further. And this is a disaster. Now, I can't say anything more about this. I'm sure you're suffering from higher prices everywhere, and probably from higher prices with your mortgage. And you know the reality. Justin Trudeau will never know that reality. He grew up a millionaire's son. He's been living at the public expense as prime minister, and he doesn't need to worry about economic reality like ordinary Canadians. And frankly, I don't think he knows any ordinary Canadians. And he has contempt for the ordinary Canadians because just look at his attitude during the Freedom Convoy protest. Those were ordinary Canadians who were affected by his pandemic mandates. And he couldn't even meet with them. He didn't want to talk with them. He didn't even want to identify them except as misogynist, racist, and deplorable people who had no business protesting. So that's Trudeau's attitude towards ordinary people.